I moved into this lakeside neighborhood because of one thing that really mattered to me: the water. The lake stretched out like a sheet of glass in the mornings, mist rising as the sun painted streaks of gold across its surface. It was calm, it was quiet, and for someone like me who worked long, stressful hours, that lake was everything. I'd grab my rod before dawn, stroll down the dock, and cast a line into the still water, feeling all the tension drain from my shoulders. Neighbors would sometimes wave as they walked their dogs or jogged around the path, and for a while I thought I'd found the perfect escape, at least until Karen decided otherwise. Karen Whitfield wasn't just a neighbor, she was the HOA president, self-appointed queen and enforcer of every petty rule you could imagine. She strutted around with her clipboard like a sheriff in an old western town, except instead of keeping order, she thrived on control. She monitored mailbox colors, grass length, fence height, and even the brightness of Christmas lights. People whispered about her at block parties, but nobody dared challenge her openly. She had the bylaws memorized like scripture, and used them to punish anyone who so much as looked at her sideways. Unfortunately, I made the mistake of becoming her next target. The first time she confronted me, I was just pulling in a base from the end of the dock, enjoying the silence of the early morning. Her heels clacked sharply against the wood, echoing like gunshots in the stillness. She didn't say hello. She didn't even look at the fish. She just stared at me with narrowed eyes and asked, "Do you have an HOA-issued permit for fishing in this lake?" For a second, I thought she had to be kidding. I even chuckled and said, "A permit? It's the community lake. Everyone uses it." But Karen's face didn't soften. Instead, she scribbled something onto her clipboard with deliberate strokes, her lips curling into what looked like satisfaction. The very next day, a paper was taped to my front door. In bold black letters, it read, "Violation, unauthorized fishing. Fine, $200. My stomach sank. I stood there on my porch, rereading it 3 times just to make sure it wasn't some bizarre prank. But no, it was official. The letter had the HOA seal, Karen's signature, and instructions for payment. I figured maybe this was some absurd new rule, a misunderstanding I could clear up later. So, against my better judgment, I paid it. I told myself it wasn't worth a fight. After all, it was just one fine, and maybe it would end there. But in my gut, something told me it wouldn't. Sure enough, less than a week later, another notice arrived. This one accused me of unauthorized dock use, with a $150 penalty attached. The explanation was even more insulting. It claimed the dock was only for approved recreational activities, and fishing apparently wasn't one of them unless you got the board's approval. I shook my head in disbelief, but that was just the beginning. The following week, I was cited for excessive fish cleaning noise, slapped with a $100 fine for cleaning 2 small trout behind my house. Then came unapproved bucket storage by the dock for $75, followed by lingering too long after sunset, with a $250 charge. It was like Karen had made it her personal mission to invent rules just to drain my wallet. By this point, I couldn't ignore it anymore. It was obvious she was targeting me, but I had no idea why. Maybe she didn't like the fact that I enjoyed the lake, or maybe she simply needed someone to flex her authority on. Whatever the reason, I decided to take my frustration to the HOA meeting. When I walked into the community hall that evening, I felt like I was stepping into a courtroom. The board members sat in a row behind their long table with Karen dead center, tapping her pen against her stack of papers like a gavel. Neighbors filled the folding chairs around me, some whispering, some avoiding eye contact. When my turn came, I stood and explained how unfair the fines were, how the lake had always been for everyone. Karen leaned forward, her chin resting on her hand, smirking as if she'd been waiting for this moment. Her eyes sparkled with condescension as she said, "The rules are the rules. If you don't like them, maybe this isn't the right community for you." A few people shifted in their seats, but no one spoke up. It was clear she held them in check with fear of being her next target. My face burned with frustration as I looked around the room, realizing no one would defend me. That was the night I understood exactly what Karen was doing. This wasn't about preserving the neighborhood or following bylaws. This was about power, about control. about making an example out of me for everyone else to see. After that humiliating HOA meeting, I went home fuming. I couldn't sleep, tossing in bed while Karen's smug expression replayed in my head like a broken record. Every fine she had slapped on me was taped neatly to a folder on my kitchen counter, and seeing them stacked together only fueled my anger. At first, I thought about hiring a lawyer, but friends told me it would cost thousands just to fight the HOA. Then I considered moving, but the idea of giving up the lake, the one thing that made this place special, was unbearable. So instead of surrendering, I started thinking differently. If Karen was using the rules against me, maybe it was time I used the system against her. The next morning, I went down to the county records office, a dusty old building with stacks of paperwork taller than I was. I asked the clerk about the ownership of the lake, expecting her to tell me it was controlled by the HOA or some government body. But when she pulled up the files, my jaw nearly hit the floor. The HOA didn't own the lake. In fact, it was listed as private property, originally sold decades ago to a local family who had moved out of state years back. Even stranger, the property had been sitting in limbo, with unpaid taxes piling up for more than 10 years. That meant, legally, the lake was still up for grabs. My pulse quickened as I realized might have stumbled onto something bigger than I ever imagined. For the next few days, I obsessed over those records. I spent hours researching property law, calling real estate offices, and even visiting the county assessor to confirm the details. Everything lined up perfectly. The HOA had no claim to the lake, no legal right to dictate how it was used, and the current owners had long abandoned it. All it would take was paying off the back taxes, filing the transfer paperwork, and the entire body of water would belong to whoever wanted it badly enough. I couldn't believe Karen had missed something this massive. But then again, people like her never bothered to look deeper. They thrived on intimidation, not actual authority. And the more I thought about it, the more my anger turned into something sharper: determination. Securing the lake wasn't cheap, but compared to the fines Karen had already stacked on me, it felt like justice. I liquidated some savings, pulled a little from my retirement fund, and within a month I had everything filed and processed. The day I signed those documents, holding the deed in my hands, I swear I felt lighter than I had in months. For the first time since moving here, I wasn't just reacting to Karen's games, I was holding the winning card. I imagined her face when she realized the lake she loved to police, the lake she fined me for fishing in, the lake she claimed belonged to the community, was no longer hers to control. It was mine down to the very last ripple on the water. The first time I walked back to the dock after securing the deed, it felt completely different. The air was lighter. The water seemed calmer. And for once, I didn't feel the weight of Karen's invisible eyes watching from her window. I brought my rod, sat at the edge, and fished without a single ounce of fear that a fine would show up taped to my door. The sound of the reel spinning was pure freedom. Neighbors strolled past, some offering awkward smiles, others glancing nervously as if they expected Karen to appear out of nowhere and start yelling. What none of them knew yet was that Karen had officially lost the war before she even realized it had started. It didn't take long for word to spread. A few days later, Karen stormed down to the dock in her usual heels, clipboard clutched like a sword, ready to cut me down with another so-called violation. Her voice boomed across the water as she shouted that I was once again breaking HOA rules. I let her rant for a full minute, scribbling notes furiously, before I pulled the folded deed from my jacket pocket. Calmly, I handed it to her. The color drained from her face as she read, her lips trembling while her eyes darted back and forth between the paper and me. The moment she realized the lake was legally, mine was the first time I ever saw her truly speechless. The silence didn't last long. At the very next HOA meeting, Karen tried to spin the story in her favor. She stood at the podium waving her hands, insisting the HOA had shared rights to the lake and that I had acted out of line by stealing community property. But when I stood up and showed the paperwork to the entire room, you could feel the shift instantly. People leaned forward, whispering, some gasping out loud. For years, Karen had ruled with her clipboard and threats. But with one piece of paper, her entire authority over the lake crumbled in front of everyone. For once, she had no rule to hide behind, no fine she could invent to cover her mistake. Owning the lake gave me power I hadn't even anticipated. I filed a notice that from that day forward, the dock and lake access were closed to all HOA members unless granted written permission by me. The same neighbors who once avoided eye contact began knocking on my door, some politely asking if they could fish, others begging me to reconsider. I wasn't cruel, but I was deliberate. I banned HOA board members outright, making sure Karen and her allies couldn't step foot near the water. I let a few kind neighbors use the lake, but only under my terms. Watching the shift in dynamics was almost surreal. People who once bowed to Karen's authority now looked at me differently, realizing the power she had wielded for years was nothing compared to a single overlooked deed. So what would you have done if your HOA tried to fine you like this? Drop your answer in the comments. I'm curious. Do you think I went too far? Or not far enough? Let me know below. Ever dealt with a crazy HOA before? Share your story in the comments. I might feature it next time. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications because you don't want to miss what happens next in HOA Karen's world. More wild HOA stories are coming your way, so smash that subscribe button and join the ride. And trust me, this isn't the last time Karen and I clash. You'll want to see what happens next. This lake battle was just the beginning. You won't believe the next move she tried to pull.